All right, thanks everyone for listening to the Government Sales Momentum Podcast. Today, I've got a longtime friend, David Rothzeid, on the show today. Dave's a vice president of Shield Capital, and how I know him from is the Air Force. You know, Dave and I worked together at Hanscom. We were both program managers together there, and he's done a lot of really cool jobs from a Ghost program, which he'll talk about maybe. If you're lucky, he'll talk about his PM experience. And then he went on to DIU, which is a really interesting organization, and ultimately the ABMS PEM, Advanced Battle Management System, which was near and dear to my heart. And I'm sure David's to some degree. So Dave, how you doing?
Doing well. You know, life keeps bringing us back together. I feel like you sort of undersold the way we work together. I'm pretty sure I worked for you, right? You were signing my performance reports and keeping me in line.
Well, you know, we're all on the other side of that now, right? So now we can let our beards grow a little bit longer and chill out. But you know, one thing I did leave out was that you were the lead singer for our band, the Merkle Hash Trees at Hanscom.
Merkle Hash Trees,
which may be the legacy that lives on.
I don't think so. I mean, I think you should tell our podcast listeners what a Merkle hash tree is.
You know, if I had to describe the Merkle hash tree algorithm or whatever the hell it is again, it would probably I'd probably put a lot of people to sleep. But maybe that's a story for when we do our next podcast, how we came up with the Merkle hash trees as a name. But I believe that was related to an insider threat program we were working on. So
we'll just say it was classified and stick to acquisition here.
There we go. That's classified. I can't get into that. Can't get into that today. So how's everything going?
Life is good. You know, so I separated officially in September of 2021, but also was able to do a program called Skill Bridge, which I highly recommend to any transitioning military personnel. Allows you to do an internship with a company that, you know, you think you'd like to work at. And so I was fortunate enough with Shield Capital, and I'll talk a little bit about how I found myself in this role, which I find to be pretty unique, but also maybe of wide interest to any military people that are listening or people that are familiar with the government acquisition space, if they're trying to get into venture capital, like how that all sort of came together. But yeah, I mean, life is good being a venture capitalist and kind of learning a new set of skills, getting to interact with amazing entrepreneurs who are trying to build disruptive technology and make an impact, not just on national security, but in the broader world market, right? For whatever it is that they're doing. And I can't complain, you know, it's really nice.
Oh, that's awesome. I feel like you basically have took what maybe some of the stuff we were working on at Hanscom in the Air Force together and kind of taken that to the next level on the non-government side with some of the companies. I know that, you know, we were always trying to hire those companies that had innovative solutions and advanced technologies, a lot of whom, you know, weren't used to working with the government or maybe didn't know how. And we can hit a little bit of that today too. I'm sure the audience would be interested in that. But let's start with you, man. Where are you from, and kind of maybe walk us through how you landed in the Air Force as a PM and some of the jobs you had in there.
Oh man, I guess it's not so dissimilar from a lot of people, but I grew up in Ohio, Cincinnati. So I'm a huge Cincinnati Bengals fan. So finally had my first good year in life ever. Very rewarding. Went to Miami University, sort of stumbled into the ROTC program. I could not have told you the difference between an officer and enlisted person until I joined ROTC my sophomore year. Went to field training. Was really bad at it the first half, did okay the second half. My field training officer, she was like, you know, David, I'm not going to lie, I was pretty worried about you there. But it turned out she was a contracting officer. And when you're at field training, you get to sort of see and hear from a lot of the different jobs that people are doing. And at that point, I thought, I'm going to be a fighter pilot, right? I have great vision. I'm in pretty good shape.
Right.
That's what you do. Mm-hmm. And then you kind of learn about the rest of what the Air Force does. And I was an economics major, so I really gravitated towards that business side and was able to be a direct accession as an acquisition officer with my first duty assignment to Peterson Air Force Base. And I kind of said, I'm going to keep doing this job while it's fun. And that's exactly what I did. So 13 years of a lot of fun, a lot of good memories, got to live in a lot of cool bases, locations, met incredible leaders, worked with incredible people. And finished up at the Pentagon. But, that first duty assignment at Peterson Air Force Base, working on a very sleepy ground satellite control system called the Air Force Satellite Control Network. My first job was trying to remove and replace some Windows 95 software and implement Windows XP. And that was in 2008, 2009, as well as upgrading a few Cisco routers that I think had also gone obsolete. So it was an interesting place to sort of learn about the variability of acquisition. But after Peterson, I was dead set on getting to a city because I just love cities.
Right.
And Hanscom Air Force Base being close to Boston, finagled my way into a green door assignment. And that's how I got into Special Programs Division. And of course, that's where we met.
Of course, greatest city on earth. I know everyone, you included, may not agree with that, but I was always trying to get back to Boston. It's interesting about the acquisitions path because I was kind of the same as you. Coming in like, hey, I'm gonna. I did fly for the first part of my career, but I remember going through officer training school. It was a 13-week wonder, and asking like, hey, because thinking about, hey, beyond flying and what is there and what could be an interesting job, not just in the Air Force but afterwards, so a skill set, because you always hear about transitioning military that have a hard time finding a career afterwards. But one thing everyone told me was, well, hey, if you want to be employed and actually have a lot of opportunity to provide value, becoming an acquisitions officer is really, an interesting pathway. And it's something that I kind of kept in the back of my mind until I later joined the ranks. But so fast forwarding to, we both ended up at Hanscom around the same time. What year did you get there?
I got there in 2012. So there was a little bit of a internal crisis, right? As they were moving away from Electronic Systems Center and embracing Air Force Lifecycle Management Center. So to me, it all seemed fairly obvious, like, okay, we don't have these centers anymore, but we still have our programs that we have to execute on. But Hanscom Air Force Base was going through a little bit of a crisis, establishing the two PEOs there, C3INN, which we both worked in. Right. And then at the time, PEO Battle Management, now known as PEO Digital. Mm-hmm. And then they were standing up a third one on the nuclear side. But it was an interesting time to get to Hanscom. I went from post-milestone C acquisition, so dealing with programs that are in sustainment, dealing with a lot of obsolescence issues, like how can we keep the operational mission going? And then when I came to Hanscom, in a lot of cases, we were sort of pre-milestone A, so that early R&D, trying to help shape what are the future requirements going to look like, what is this program going to turn into when it grows up, right? Once it gets its established budget, which I'm sure we're going to hit on a little bit with the Advanced Battle Management System, ABMS. So that was kind of a culture shock for me. And then, of course, I went from very much out in the open, everybody knows about like the technology capabilities of the AFSCN, to green door assignment where I'm getting read into these classified programs. And, some of them were interesting. Some of them I would go on to learn are not even relevant from a technology standpoint, especially after spending a couple of years in Silicon Valley and seeing the art of the possible, the true art of the possible. So, it was weird kind of dealing with this different frame of reference throughout my acquisition. But, something you touched on, it's a little secret, right, about how fun and different acquisition could be. And when I say acquisition, I'm also lumping in not just program management, but also like logistics, contracting, financial management, science, engineering. So it's this big, broad. And when I try to tell people like, what is it? It's like, hey, you're kind of like a businessman, right? And of course, every organization is a little bit different in the way that they're trying to sell product, buy product, right? Operate product. And that's really the lifeline and the lifeblood of what acquisition does. And so being a program manager, you sort of have to learn all of these different tricks of the trade. And of course, something that makes the DoD fairly unique relative to a lot of industries, although I'm sure in the healthcare center, they like to argue with you about which one's more burdensome, is there's just a ton of rules and regulations and policies and instructions and guides about how you should do things. And then, of course, moving around to different organizations, each one has their own little culture or the thing that they're more familiar with. And so even if you're an acquisition officer at Peterson Air Force Base, you might have a totally different lexicon for the way you explain doing the actual work when I went to Hanscom. And so it's a never ending learning cycle. I wouldn't say it's the most efficient thing ever, but at the same time, it keeps you on your toes.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot that goes into, putting a company on contract. And, as I espouse on the podcast and with a lot of our clients is, having focus if you're a company trying to sell to the government, knowing who you're selling to is so important because, what you just touched on was everyone buys a little bit differently, right? So if I know that I'm selling to, a unit at Hanscom Air Force Base, and I know that that unit might use GSA, to put a company on contract, for instance, versus maybe at Peterson, they're using, blanket purchase agreements, simplified acquisitions, just a lot of faster, lower dollar purchases, maybe to get to the same thing. And you just need to know who you're selling to and understand their mission and understand their contracting means. And I think it's interesting too, something about Hanscom. When me and you were there was a couple of years where we were in the same unit where we were trying to do things a little bit faster than the rest of the Air Force. And not only within the unit, but you actually got out, you had a chance to go to the GHOST program as well. And I don't know how much you can actually talk about that, but, at least I could say it's an opportunity for an acquisitions officer to learn how to, maybe do acquisitions with special forces and run a little bit faster. And it seems like that you took that and kind of ran with it throughout the next few years of your career. You want to talk about that at all? Or?
I'd love to. I mean, the GHOST program, it definitely like re-blued me. And that term means like, maybe you're getting a little bit downtrodden with your day-to-day work. And then you go and you do something that's a little bit more exciting and different. And it just re-energizes you and makes you kind of want to stay in the military, but also like bring change with you, right? To wherever you're at. And so the GHOST program, I think, does a phenomenal job of empowering young acquisition officers with a slate of missions that there isn't like a right answer per se, but somebody is depending on you to get something done ASAP. And I got there in December of 2013, and within a week was handed a requirement and a budget line around a urgent operational need in Africa, and needed to put a contract together ASAP so we could go track a bad guy. And that's about as the extent of what I can tell you. But in that time frame, I built out the justification approval for why it could only be this one vendor that could perform the duties of putting together the determination and findings, putting together the statement of work, putting the DD 254, right, the security documents, the contract deliverables, the contract line items. Like, yes, I had a contracting officer that I was sort of working with. And yes, I had a requirements person that I was trying to address their needs. But as the GHOST, I mean, this was Christmas. This was getting close to Christmas break, right? They had just done the thing. And like Thanksgiving to Christmas at a headquarters position, even if it's SOCOM, people are sort of going into vacation mode. But by working over Christmas, like we got that contract on and we were able to fly missions in Africa to do this thing that was critically important, and it persisted for a couple of years. And that was like a huge learning opportunity to basically take this requirement, run it end to end, and then see it in operation, calling downrange to make sure that the contractor had the right type of facilities to be able to do what they needed to from an infrastructure standpoint. And that was just the tip of the iceberg of what we were doing down at my GHOST program. And then you got to go downrange. I have one story where we were moving a Scan Eagle site from one base, Bastion, to Kandahar, and having to negotiate with the international service arm people, right, ISAF, and get the right type of frequency so we could operate from the base. And then we were working with the Army, the G4, right, to help stand up this new location with Connex containers. They went home. We had a forklift and we needed to be operational the next day. And so fortunately, I'd gotten a forklift license back at Peterson as an augmentee duty. And I was like, well, they left. We got to get this done. They're contractors. They can't drive it. And there's just like a can-do attitude when you're dealing with the SOCOM. And so coming back to Hanscom, then Colonel Kligman at the time was like, hey, David, there's this Combat Cloud initiative, and I want you to own it and make sure that the Air Force has a seat at the table and don't let the Army and Navy dominate this thing. And so the birth of the Tactical Cloud Reference Implementation, TCRI,
Yep.
was born. And I think without that SOCOM experience, I'm not sure, how well that could have gone for us.
Yeah. I think a lot of people listening would be, or probably are amazed because you're talking about a contracting effort at SOCOM. How long did it take you to actually put that company on contract?
Less than 30 days.
And that's extremely fast, extremely fast. And it was a sole source contract.
It was sole source. So we had to justify, right? So I had to put together the body of work as to why this company was the only one that could possibly do it. And SOCOM, everyone says they move fast, they've got special authorities. That's not true. They don't have special authorities. What I would say is they do a much better job of linking their acquisition community, their contract community, their requirements community, and their operational community. And I think that's thematically something that's super important for any small business that's listening to this right now, right? And if we want to dovetail a little bit into like how most small businesses get their foot in the door, they're leveraging the SBIR program, right?
Right.
Having an SBIR, especially a phase 2 with a company, that's great. Someone's there to provide you some sort of feedback around the utility of the thing that they're doing. But as a small business owner, as an entrepreneur, depending on that end user or that program office to help you scale the feared valley of death, you can't depend on your government sponsor to do that for you. You've got to bring together the person from the Air Force, the requisite major command, right? So in a lot of cases, that could be Air Combat Command or Air Mobility Command or Global Strike Command or Air Force Special Operations Command.
And here we're talking about someone with a requirement, right? And probably
with
money
the requirements. As well. Yep. You might want to even be thinking about who's the combatant commander that's going to ultimately be using this thing. How can they advocate that they're getting utility? So ensuring that you're positioning yourself to participate in an exercise, whether that's Trident Spectre or Pacific Rim or Red Flag, right? Like, how can you get your stuff in front of an operational community that's also going to vouch for it while you're building out the requirement? And then if you're not dealing with a program office, right? Maybe you're dealing with a research lab. How can you make that connective handoff to the right PEO so that the responsible stakeholder who's going to help you implement this into an existing program of record, which I know everyone talks about, I need to become my own program of record. I would caution you, and we'll talk about my time at the Pentagon about what it means to stand up a new program of record. Because let me tell you, you might be waiting a while, but there are existing programs that are probably doing something similar to you. And how can you weave what you're doing into their current acquisition program baseline and make that program manager who's trying to be responsive to their requirement holder a hero because they're delivering something even better, more joyful than the requirement called for in the first place. So there's a lot of
thing. Yeah. I didn't want to cut you off. I was just going to say, this is an interesting angle that I didn't intend to get into with you, but I would say that I don't want to say it's the most common challenge, but for companies that have gone and won their SBIR, that have found the user, the end user, like says that here's their software or tool, and this is awesome. And a lot of times they're able to sell it small scale, to units. That usually turns into a SBIR or two, right? But scaling it from there, what do you have to do? And that's, kind of what you're touching on there, right? You win it. And then certainly there are some contracting.
Well, the contracting is separate, right? And we will definitely touch on the various channels of contracting and what does that mean? And depending on where you are from a maturation standpoint, I have a lot of opinions and thoughts. But I would just say the way that you build advocacy for what you're doing, you have to recognize that there is a status quo, and to do something totally revolutionary is difficult. What I would advise companies is, how can you be evolutionary? How can you build on the programs that exist today,
right,
and just make them a little bit better because your solution solves a pain point, and everybody who needs to be an advocate is aware of it, and you're sort of being that central focal point, bringing them all together. So when we talk about bringing them together, it's the program office, of course. It's the requirements owner, right? The MAJCOMs. It's the users. Maybe they're at an operational unit, or maybe they're actually at the combatant command themselves. And then at a certain point, you'll want to get the Pentagon involved too, right? That stakeholder, because that's the person who's going to ensure that that existing program continues to carry forward their budget and can even potentially put a small line item in the justification books, the J books, right? So that's the RDocs and PDocs, so that your niche thing can get established nestled inside of an existing program.
Sure. No, that's great advice. And you're right. I mean, there's plenty of programs that exist. Training comes to mind, right? Where you might have a training program in a certain field in the military, and maybe you even do have a revolutionary technology, but it's centered around training. You might not need your own program of record. You could fit squarely into this training bucket. And then, like you said, eventually talking with the Pentagon, we talk more around, hey, program office requirements and then user. But you're right. There is a time when talking with the Pentagon is what you need to do. We had someone else on who was a 06 there that did a lot of the congressional work. And, he discussed, and you guys can check out, I'll put it in the show notes where you can find that podcast. But, when it's the right time to be a lobbyist and when it's the right time to, be talking with the Pentagon. But there are different stages to this. And it's just kind of knowing where you're at and, what's appropriate for the time.
Yeah. And I think it depends on what you want for your business. So if you're looking to if you want to become like the next Anduril, right, Shield AI, then at a certain point, you're going to need to engage in some sort of lobbying effort, right, and establish your own programs of record, because they're trying to go up against your traditional defense primes who own a lot of the programs of record and the channels and access points. But if you're trying to be a small business, a medium-sized business, maybe you're not going to be venture backed, and we can talk a little bit about how I think about the defense industry base and venture capital writ large. But I would advise those companies to look at, from a contracting standpoint, look at GSA schedule, right? Because that can be an easy button that you can continue to refer your DoD customer to buy capability. But of course, not every DoD entity is familiar with GSA schedule, or maybe they don't have the right waivers in place.
Yeah.
And so the timelines can drag on super long. Another opportunity is to partner with the primes, right? And access the programs of record that way. And I know a lot of people can be very skittish about, working with the primes, they're going to take my intellectual property or they're going to cut me on the margins.
Right.
I mean, I would say you need to develop the right relationships with the right primes, because that's what it comes down to. Like contracts are very impersonal. But if you can get the right types of advocates at the prime, they will take care of you and do right by you. And I've seen that time and time again. It's when you don't take the time to build those relationships and ensure, and it just becomes a transaction, then it starts to get a little bit, unwieldy and maybe not as friendly to the entrepreneur or the small business, medium-sized business owner themselves.
Sure. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. Interesting. So relationships is something we talk a bit about. What's your opinion on the importance of relationships, not with maybe primes, but let's take small business and the program office. In your opinion, where does the relationship fall in the level of importance there?
So it depends. I mean, if you're dealing with a research lab, I would say their familiarity and understanding of the small business and wanting to tinker with the technology and make it great is probably very high. But is the research lab person that you're working with understanding what sort of like business goals you have, and are they going to help you scale and grow your company to whatever your dream and vision is? Probably not. And then on the program office side, I hate to say it, but at least when I was a lieutenant, a captain, we didn't touch SBIR.
Yeah, sure.
That was kind of a oddball side job. It basically just looked like a 3.5% tax to our RDT&E budget line, and we didn't expect much good to come from it. I have to admit, what AFWorks has done in the last 5 years now in revamping it to try to build out the defense industry base and try to bring successes to the forefront, I think the program has changed dramatically. I don't think we'll know about its successes for several years because it takes time for these things to sort of work through the systems. Another cyber program that I was pretty impressed with and just got a recent briefing from down in Austin is the Army Application Lab and their Spartan program. where they bring a very nice white glove approach to bringing in the user, bringing in the program office, so that when you hit success, you've already got advocates trying to plan for that transition pathway.
Sure.
But that's very difficult to set up. It's very difficult to scale it. And so I find that there's a lot of cyber phase twos happening. But if you're lucky enough to win one of those, and you cannot just solely rely on the program manager on the other side to do all of your heavy lifting to ensure that you transition.
No. And I mean, what you talk about, it's interesting because a lot of you mentioned being a program manager is almost like being a jack of all trades. And, what we talk about with a lot of our clients and, just people that give us a call for a consult or interviewing people on a podcast is, the easier you can make it for your contracting team, the better, right? So if you can come in and link together, hey, you're already talking with the requirements people, and maybe you have an idea of where there's some funding that can go on contract, and make it easier for them to put you on contract. So if you have those relationships in place, those teaming agreements with companies that have maybe contract vehicles, whether it's GSA or something else, that allows us to get to you. I say us, like I'm still in the government, but it allows the government to get to you a little bit easier. Because there are certainly times where there were companies I wanted to hire that I had no idea like how to get to them because there was nothing, you had to be really creative to get them there. So there's certainly some work there that they can do. Just because I want to get to Shield Capital, but there's two more pieces to your Air Force career I wanted to jump on. I'm extremely familiar with ABMS because it's something I worked on a lot. But I know in the beginnings, in the birthing of ABMS, I guess you could say, you were in the unit when, for instance, the capabilities-based assessment was written for ABMS, and we got to see that program, which is supposed, and you ended up becoming the PEM of this. This could be an extremely large program. We'll see, where it goes. But this started as the replacement for AWACS, and then we have JSTARS, and then recently in the news, and of course that turned into an AOA later on, and then it became a program of record, and you became the PEM for that. Recently, we saw that we've got it looked like the Wedgetail is going to be providing some some support to AWACS that are being retired. So why don't you give us kind of an overview of your experience as, first of all, tell everybody what a PEM is, because everyone doesn't know what a PEM is. You became the ABMS PEM, and then a little bit about, your time there and where you think ABMS is going.
Okay. Well, so we did skip over DIU. So I'll say that when you were doing the capabilities-based assessment for what was supposed to be the original ABMS, that was 2016. I went to DIU and then got to the Pentagon in 2019, just as ABMS had sort of evolved to become not a platform, not a sensor replacement, but what Dr. Roper at the time coined the Internet of Things. And then what followed was all the product lines, the famous and infamous ones, I think at this point, right? And it was this idea around, should we be constrained to just a platform? Or is it really, how do we move data around the battlefield so that the decision makers have access to the right information at the right time, at the right level?
Yeah, so we had an unexpected power interruption, which caused my entire office to go out. But I'm sure through some creative editing, we will get back on track here. So just for everybody, if I were trying to resync you in here, we've just walked through almost all of David's Air Force career, very obviously briefly. We hit on touch points. And start talking about ABMS and that program and what it entails, and we're going to touch on DIU. I skipped over that. He touched on it a little bit, but let's continue where you left off with Advanced Power Management System.
Yeah. So thanks. So I was hitting on data becoming like the new oil, and we see it happening in our everyday lives, right? So anything around social media, somehow that is being monetized and then pushed back at us for selling products. On the government side, like, how can we leverage all of this incredible data that we're getting off of our exquisite sensors, off commercial sensors, and paint a picture of the battle space so that commanders have the best awareness so they can deploy the right asset at the right time based on whatever our rules of engagement is. And so by the time I got to the Pentagon, ABMS had started to morph into that. But what was difficult is decoupling what it had been, which was a replacement platform for the aging AWACS and then the aging JSTARS. And that brought in a lot of political issues, right? Because nobody wants to retire jets because there's a lot of jobs associated with that. There's a lot of heritage and history. And and so we were trying to like talk through the narrative of like how, why we need programs to be architected differently to enable the data to move across the battlefield. And it shouldn't matter whether it's going off of military SATCOM or line of sight across military sensors or leveraging commercial satellites, right? In the case of like something like Starlink. And so it was an exciting time to be in the Pentagon. It was very difficult to explain this sort of revolutionary concept because traditionally your weapon systems again are very much a stovepipe and they're wholly contained, and you've got the technology is going to probably be awarded to some sort of an integrator and they're going to do it all for you. And we were taking just a very different approach. Now by the time that I left the Pentagon, we had successfully transitioned the program to the Rapid Capability Office, and they've definitely taken some of the tenets of what was started, but they've also, I think from what I can tell, refined it a little bit more to how can we build out certain capabilities extremely well to do specific functions. But I think what the lasting legacy of that iteration of ABMS will be is to call out a lot of our C2 weapon systems that were once upon a time built in a vacuum and no longer allow that to happen, so that the systems are not dramatically different, because what they're trying to do is command and control, and what they need to be able to do is communicate with one another, right? Regardless of where you are. So I think that'll be a very good lasting legacy. And what we've seen then at the OSD level is this embrace of JADC2, right? Joint All Domain Command and Control. And so how can the services better partner together? Now, specific to ABMS and the CBA that you wrote and then the AOA that it entailed, I think it has led the Air Force to saying, we still need an asset in the sky being able to do certain components of command and control. We still need those types of sensor capabilities because of the military advantage that it provides. And of course, this is something you could probably speak to way better than I could, but it does seem like the wedge tail is a direction that the Air Force is going.
Yeah, we'll see. It hasn't happened yet. I think one theme, you basically touched on it, which is that I think ABMS and eventually JADC2 and even other things that we were working on in some different areas, because we had the opportunity to work in a lot of different places, back at Hanscom and beyond, is that idea of, hey, how do we actually communicate correctly, right? How do we get the right data to the right person so they can make a decision? And it's not just command and control and ABMS, it's everything. When you think of
business intelligence, right? Like this is something that companies are struggling with. And I think you've seen this, with the amount of money that's willing to invest in startups, right, that are digitally native, right? So built on the backbone of the internet. They're not beholden to some of the legacy systems of how they were doing decision making in the past. And they're just able to operate at a much faster rate. That's why you're seeing just so much disruption in the marketplace with these new, internet born type companies. And that was really something that I took away from my time out in Silicon Valley with Defense Innovation Unit. When I got there, it was still DIUX, right? It was at the change of the guard when we went from the 1.0 to the 2.0, and the managing partner at the time was then Raj Shah, and that's who I now work for at Shield Capital. So kind of that's sort of my linkage to Shield. But build it, my role at DIUX was helping to build the business model, right? That we now know as the commercial solutions opening and leveraging the underutilized acquisition authority, OTAs, right? Other transaction authority. And it was just an awesome time, right? And nobody was talking about how can we leverage commercial technology to solve military pain points. Maybe in small circles inside of Special Operations Command, this was going on because they've always just sort of been a little bit ahead of the curve. But by and large, from the big services, it was, we've got these requirements. We have assumed that we are the creator of the next generation of advanced technology. and we're going to pay somebody to build it to our specification. But on the flip side of that same world, in our personal lives, we're seeing the evolution of technology just get better and better and better. And the ability to communicate and see things and interact was just far surpassing, right, the technology that we were seeing on the military side. And that's why Defense Innovation Unit was stood up in the first place, right? As then Secretary of Defense Ashton Carter just saw this screaming bullet train of commercial tech and being like, uh-oh, if it's being developed on the commercial side, that means our adversaries at the click of an Amazon button can get this technology in their hands and use it against us and provide themselves an asymmetric advantage. We need to become more reactive and flexible in embracing this technology so that our own warfighters can enjoy the benefit of it. And, following DIUX, you've seen this encouraging sign of venture-backed startups building technology that you would see on the commercial side also be fairly interested in the Department of Defense. And that's where the Shield Capital thing comes into play, right? So we're certainly not the first venture capital firm to be interested in this dual use technology space. And by dual use, I know it's probably I've talked to some people, they hate the term because, a stapler is dual use. I can use it in the military, I can use it in the civilian sector. Right. But what we mean is more advanced technology that has some sort of a intended military capability that is fairly unique to the mission set, but also the basic same tenets can be applied on the commercial sector. And for us, when we invest in a company, their DNA has to be that of, I'm trying to build technology that is disruptive or innovative or unique. And I have the intent to sell and grow in both the national security marketplace and non-national security, right? Whether that's in the financial systems, whether that's in healthcare, whether that's in consumer tech, right? You name it. And the technology, by and large, can be applicable to multiple industries.
Sure.
And to some degree, some are easier than others. But that's what Shield Capital is looking at: is who can we invest in and help them build the national security marketplace as maybe a secondary or tertiary market. Because by and large, venture capital, we are judged by the returns that we get on the investments that we make, right? We've got that fiduciary responsibility to our limited partners.
Right.
So we need to sell into large markets. And while the DoD, right, is $770 billion marketplace, most of that is is in milpers. And then another large majority of that is in healthcare. And then another large majority of that is in programs in sustainment. So when you look at what is the actual addressable market of the DoD, it's significantly smaller than I think a lot of people say. And so for a venture capital firm, by and large, your company that you're investing in has to have some sort of an addressable market in the commercial, because that's where the real, what we call the TAM, total addressable marketplace, resides.
When do you think a company that's listening to this, because there are a lot of companies that either have developed a technology that they would consider disruptive, or maybe they're in the process of it. When would a company like that be ready for this type of investment?
Well, so there's different investors at different stages, right? So you've got your angel investors, and they're just willing to take a flyer on a slide deck, right? Maybe just the idea and concept. And so they're like, hey, I like the cut of your jib. Here's a $50,000 check to get started. You've got seed investors. So maybe you've got a couple people on the team and you're building your first prototype. Maybe you've even got a minimum viable product MVP that you can show them that gets them excited. For Shield Capital, we're still an early stage investor, but we're looking at that late seed Series A. So you've probably got some customer traction already. Maybe you don't have a ton of recurring revenue, but you certainly, if we're talking about like DoD parlance, like you've definitely at least got a phase 2 SBIR, or maybe you've got a DIU OTA, or you're in a different consortium, or you're partnered with a prime and selling through them. Like you've got to have a customer reference call that I can make to validate that your technology is bringing joy to somebody.
Right.
That we're not building the technology from scratch, that this isn't some aspirational thing. But what we're going to do is invest in you to help build out your team So you can hire the right business development people, the right marketing people, maybe augment your engineering team so that you can start to scale, right? And start to turn this bespoke product into something that hopefully becomes ubiquitous across a number of different use cases. And selling in and scaling inside defense is difficult. And so we recognize that the sales cycles are longer, they're more difficult. But a couple of things that Shield brings to the table is, one, we've got an incredible board of people that are just highly connected, so we can get meetings in the right places with the right people. Obviously, I've lived my life inside this acquisition system, so while there is no silver bullet to growing and scaling, as an entrepreneur, there are 1,000 dead ends that you can walk into. And the goal is to minimize and limit the dead ends, because time is the most precious resource for a startup. So how can you most judiciously spend your time trying to work through the bureaucratic DoD procurement system? The other thing that Shield Capital brings to the table is we have a strategic partnership with L3 Harris, and it's been incredible, right? And when we make an investment in a company, they take a very proactive response to, okay, what is it that this company does and how can it potentially augment the things that we're doing inside our business so that we can provide a better experience inside the programs that we're running on behalf of our DoD clients. And so that becomes a great sales channel partnership for an aspiring technology company. So there's a lot of different ways to sort of slice the onion, but Shield Capital, where we sit, is in that late seed Series A, and our intention is to lead that raise. So we're going to take a board seat, which means we're going to be very involved with you as a founder. So you got to kind of have to want somebody with national security chops coming onto your board. But at the same time, our partners at Shield Capital have all led and run successful startups themselves. So they've been in the trenches, they can empathize with you, they can help provide and bring that type of advice so you can continue to also grow in the commercial side as well. And that's just something that's, I think, fairly unique about Shield Capital, what we're bringing to the table.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very interesting formula. Certainly you have a lot of companies out there that are looking for some type of investment, but, anyone looking to sell to the government, this is, what we go over a lot, is typically a company is going to end up starting to hire people that have a background of a David Rothzeid, right? Or a Ricky Howard, or somebody that has maybe a network initially, but usually it ends up being a little bit more than that. Former contracting officers, program managers that could really, help navigate, I guess you could say, the FAR and, the different contractual options and get them in there. So it sounds like with Shield Capital, first of all, you're there, which is an amazing, bonus, but you kind of have that mixture of the funding and, the David Rothzeids and the other, other people in the company that you mentioned that have those backgrounds. And that can be, that's a recipe for success. And L3, which is one of the big primes, almost always when you look at a successful bigger company, they're subcontracting all over the place. They'll be subs themselves. They'll have people subcontracting to them. And, getting started, having somebody that already has the contract vehicles, the contracts, the different programs, with the government, if you fit into that, that's going to make it a lot easier to get some of those initial contracts, or subcontracts. So no, that is really interesting. So Dave, I've had you on the line here for an hour. We've had a power outage, and we've had some good back and forth. Is there anything that you would like to leave the audience with?
Well, so to the entrepreneurs out there, I can't empathize with you because I haven't necessarily been one myself, although I've led and started a few different programs inside the DoD. So from that standpoint, I can sympathize. But the DoD is a tough and challenging, but also a rewarding customer. And I just advise you to find partnerships with the types of firms that have the same values as you and can help you grow and prosper. This should not necessarily be a journey that's on your own, but it's certainly one that you have to lead if you want to be successful. And so I wish you good luck. If you're a transitioning military person, please feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to help where I can. And then if you're also trying to raise some funding for your own startup, Shield Capital, as long as you're dual use, as long as you're that late seed Series A, and you're in either space, artificial intelligence, autonomy, or cybersecurity, I'm interested, right? But really, it's just been a pleasure and an honor talking with you and catching up. And maybe you need to dust off the guitar, and I don't think I can really sing like that anymore, but maybe we can have a jam session.
Maybe your voice is a little bit lower and scratchier. We can do some ZZ Top or something. No, that's great. Well said. Really appreciate having you on. And how can people find you if they want to reach out?
Yeah, so I mean, LinkedIn is probably the best. Just I ask that you send me a note. I can be a little bit discerning in who I actually connect with. So, a little context goes a long way.
All right, sounds good. Well, we will put a link to your profile in the show notes. Thanks again for having you on, man. This has been a great talk. I'm sure people are going to be very interested, and hopefully first of many.
Awesome. Well, all the best to you and the family.
All right, man. Take care.